Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Other Record Labels. I'm your host, Scott Orr, where we talk about the art and culture of running an independent record label, something we've been doing for 6 years exactly. This week, we are celebrating our 6th birthday, 6 years of the Other Record Labels podcast, and 6 years of sharing ideas and struggles and tips with the greater indie record label community. First of all, thank you. Thank you for being a listener, a subscriber, a member of our Facebook community, a guest on the show. I was just thinking about this today. The mission statement of Other Record Labels includes 3 directives: to educate, empower, and encourage. Meaning sometimes it's practical things like what's the most common royalty splits, so we can go out and ask a dozen labels what they're doing and ask what their royalty splits are. And we talk to royalty experts and we can share that on an episode. Maybe here on the show, it's giving new, younger labels access to information and tools that was previously held from us years ago, from gatekeepers over the years, and at the very least, to encourage labels who are already established. They can find encouragement here, pat themselves on the back, and hopefully chip away at that imposter syndrome. Not only have we had over 500,000 downloads, I believe it's 600,000 or so, but we have over 35,000 industry folks on our mailing list, 25,000 YouTube subscribers, and our Facebook community is super thriving right now, which is awesome. One of the things I'm most proud of too is our Label Mates group. We just wrapped on our very first cohort, a group of 8 soon-to-be label owners who met for 90 minutes each week for the past 6 straight weeks, where we talked about everything and any subject related to getting their labels off the ground. It was an incredible experience for all of us. These guys are super sharp and they're going to do amazing things in the future. I know it. They're my friends now. And hopefully, here's what's cool. We're starting our next cohort in about a month or so. So if you're interested in that, go to otherrecordlabels.com/labelmates to apply. Here's what's crazy. 6 years in, and I don't really feel any itch or boredom with this subject. I'm still obsessed with releasing music, discovering music, making music, and actual records. I'm still obsessed with figuring out how to get better at doing all that, at seeing if there are any common trends in the labels we have on the show. What are the common denominators of great record labels that we all admire? This is my passion. It's my job. I'm not an expert. I'm just obsessed with the topic. A little while ago, and this brings me to today's episode. A little while ago, I was asked to do an interview for a music production company called Rhinestone Productions. They're a studio and a consulting group for indie musicians, and they have a podcast and a TikTok. And they wanted to talk about record labels. So I got to chat with Banner about record labels specifically. And what I loved about this interview and why I asked Banner if I could share it with you guys is that Banner kind of took me to task on the need for record labels, which is great of him to do, because answering questions like this can honestly really help us understand or reaffirm why we as indie record labels exist and why we think we should exist. So a big thanks to Rhinestone for allowing me to share this episode with you. Do me a favor, just because it's very generous of them, go check them out via the link in the description of this episode. You can follow them on TikTok and subscribe to their pod. It was very generous of Banner to have me on the show in the first place and then to allow me to use the audio for you guys. I hope you enjoy this interview as we celebrate the world of indie record labels and the incredible community that all of you have been a part of for these past 6 years.
Scott, this episode's going to be a little bit different than some of the other ones I've done because I think you and I, in theory, I think you and I hold slightly opposing views, and I think your opinion obviously is that record labels are an essential part of the music industry in 2024. And for me, I have worked for a major label. I have had record deals offered to me that were awful. I mean, horrendous, which we can get into. And I probably know 100 musicians who've been signed to various labels, from top of the line pop lines to, their neighborhood punk label. And I would say of those 100 musicians, 98 of them have had less than stellar experiences. So Scott, my first question is, where do record labels fit into the landscape in 2024?
Well, I mean, I think what we would agree on is that they're not necessary. So I understand that. I mean, in the same way that record stores are not necessary. We don't need record stores. We can have records shipped directly from musicians to music fans. We don't need a distributor to get that record from the plant to the store to then to the store to the fan. But obviously we see a place for record stores as music fans. There's something we appreciate about record stores. And even taking it a step back further, it's like we don't need vinyl. We don't need CDs and we don't need cassettes anymore to consume music. Yet they're at all-time highs. So certainly for vinyl sales they are, because there's a different connection. So to answer, I don't even know if you asked this question, but a lot of people ask this question, or they'll exclaim that we don't need record labels. And I 100% agree that we don't need record labels. However, not everybody out there, and actually I am not on a record label. I'm on my own record labels. So that is independent. I am independent. I am the label boss. I discovered myself. I've had, like you, I've had opportunities to work with other labels. I've looked at thought, no, it doesn't really make sense. I like to have control. So I think I'll stay independent. But not everyone is like you or I. Not everybody has a music podcast. Not everyone else has a music business. There's parts of the independent landscape that we really like and that we really get excited about. And I've worked with artists on my label, and I've met people in our record label community or on our show. I've met people who have no interest in getting involved on the business side of things. They're either intimidated by it, but more than that, they're just not interested at all. And they don't want to get involved with it. And they want a teammate. They want somebody else to help out with that. I mean, does a band need a drummer? No. But there are drummers out there in the bands who play a very specific role. And the guitar player doesn't want to be the drummer, but the drummer does. And so I think that I see a good record label as being a team member. I see them as being another person in the band who's really passionate about stuff like distribution, manufacturing, PR and promotion and marketing. These are things that our people in our record label community and the record labels that I've met, these are things that like we're actually really passionate about. We go to bed at night thinking about unique marketing things. We go to bed at night thinking about playlist curators and how to reach them and how to find them and how to get on playlists. So that to me, I think, and one of the things I love about other record labels in the community that we've built is we have this kind of like unspoken call to action to redefine the record labels. Because a lot of us grew up understanding that record labels were problematic. Record labels from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s into the 2000s, and even still today, I'm sure, have a really bad reputation for how they treat artists. And I think the independent record label can operate on a completely different wavelength. And that's what my full-time job isn't to advocate for record labels in the music industry. I don't really need to change people's mind. My full-time job is to help people who want to start a record label and to encourage them, empower them, make their job easier, because their job, and I would say 95% of the record labels that I meet, they are starting their record label out of a place of fandom. It's pure music fandom. And I think it's the same thing for you in your business. It's that you see an artist, you hear an artist, and you think it's not fair that they're not getting on such and such playlist. It's not fair that they're making 20 records or 200 records and only selling 2 to their parents. Like you think that they should have a bigger platform. And 95 to 99 to 100% of the labels I meet and I work with, that's where they're coming from. They're saying, I'm starting a label because I don't think people appreciate prog rock enough. I don't think people appreciate new jazz enough. I don't think people appreciate Christian gospel Afrobeats enough. I don't think people appreciate music from musicians from India that aren't in the Bollywood scene. So these are the real legitimate labels that I've met, and this is the place that they're coming from. Soapbox off.
No, we love the soapbox here at the Rhinestone Podcast. That was great. So what would you say are the main types of labels that are thriving today?
Do you mean like independent, like outside of the majors, I guess?
Yes. I mean, obviously it can be majors as well because there's like subsidiaries and stuff like that. But I guess the independents, who are what kind of independent labels are thriving today?
I think an independent label that is thriving is an independent label that has got down very narrow in their niche. And they've really identified that group of people who like a certain thing, who appreciate other similar brands, wear certain clothes, drink certain coffee, like certain beverages, eat certain foods, watch certain movies. There is a very, very specific group of people that is your audience. And I encourage every record label I meet, you've got to figure out what this niche is. And like I mentioned, there's a British record label called Gospel Hydration, and they found their audience of people who love gospel and Christian hip hop and, Afro beats and stuff that you just wouldn't normally associate with gospel music. And they found that and they approach a young audience, and their audience are very similar people. If you see them at a show, they're kind of wearing the same clothes and they're of the same age. And so to me, you found this like certain group of people, and chances are they like similar artists. Chances are they like certain other brands. And so I think it's really important that a label says, okay, we are a label that, first of all, loves experimental music, ambient experimental music. We are a label that loves cassettes, and we're going to release exclusively on cassette. We're also a label that focuses primarily on graphic design and creating really great looking products. And we're only going to make 50 of these cassettes. And our audience loves those three things equally, in that cross section of those three things. And those tapes are going to sell out overnight, no doubt. And there are labels that operate like that. If a label comes on the scene and says, I want to be the next Sony, I want to be the next Universal, that doesn't make any sense. That's like you opening a brick and mortar store downtown and saying, I want to be the next Walmart. If you say, no, I want to be a gift shop for this type of person selling these type of products, then you'll be more successful than saying, hey, we're the next Walmart, right? So that, to me, I think the best labels, the labels I get so excited about, are labels that are serving a really, really small niche group.
So if someone were to start a label, should they plan so like, for example, you talked about niching down. So we'll use your ambient label as an example, right? So you said that the first thing is they make ambient music, they cassettes only, and high impact graphic design. Should a label plan for that before they start?
100%.
So in that same vein, so obviously you can find those niches in the music industry. Or I guess not the music industry, but the music listening community, the active listeners. How does a label find an audience? Like, I mean, that seems like such a, obviously I understand what you're talking about building the avatar and wearing the same brands and stuff like that. But I mean, it's very difficult to cut through the noise and find those kind of people and find the true signals, those true fans. How does a label go and find those kind of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, the scary answer to that these days is the algorithm. The algorithm on Instagram, on your For You page, or even on Spotify, will actually do a pretty good job at eventually showing you those things. Even YouTube will say, if you subscribe to a graphic designer how-to thing, if you subscribe to this cassette label and you subscribe to these artists, we kind of know a little bit about you. You also shopped at Nike and you buy like these high-end shoes and blah, blah, blah. So like I think the algorithm has gotten good at showing me things. I've seen on Instagram, I follow like cool, great graphic designers and apparel companies. And I also follow like unique equipment, like music equipment. So like hi-fi stereos, or like unique, I've been getting these ads for this like speaker system that's transparent. I think the company's called Transparent, and they make turntables and speaker systems that are all encased in glass or plastic. It's the whole thing is transparent. And I'm beside myself. I have to buy one. It's so beautiful. But like for some reason that got fed to me. And I think it's because I follow gear companies and recording studios but also designers. And so they probably know, oh yeah, you're going to like this. And they're right. So I do think that there is a certain cream rising to the top. It's not something that you can rely on. But I think when you make quality products for your community will find you, whether that's word of mouth. I mean, there's you can go to the affinity groups on Facebook and on Reddit and spam there and say, here's a new release. The reality is that a lot of these niches that we're talking about, they actually have subgenres. They have those subgenres have names attached to them that you or I have never heard of, but people in that space are really obsessed with, like goth video game music from Japan. I mean, that's like those, if you're catering to that space, you probably know where those people are hanging out online, hopefully.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And actually that's one of the things I tell artists when we work with them is to like go find subreddits that will work to your music and post there and see how it does. And it's amazing. I've seen people have songs that have just blown up on Spotify because of they found the right niche, they made the right post, they made the right content, and it killed on Reddit. And then they tried Instagram ads as well, and it wasn't as effective because they found the right target audience. So I think even if you're not running a record label, thinking like that is a good frame of reference for figuring out who your audience is. And you need to figure out not the audience that likes you, but the audience that loves you.
That's right. And really, this would be true too for independent artists. So it's not just record labels who have a genre or a subgenre or a niche, but it's also true for artists. Like, what is your niche? I mean, for me to call myself a singer-songwriter or a pop singer-songwriter or even a folk singer-songwriter, that's not narrow enough. I need to go narrower if I want to find my people. And one of the ways you can do that is you can look at who would you compare yourself as an artist? So if I make a certain kind of music, who are my peers that are maybe a little bit more pop or certainly more popular than me? Where are they? So then go to Spotify, see what playlists they're on. And Spotify has a lot of like really nuanced micro niche playlists that they curate. But then of course, there's a lot of user generated playlists as well. And so what are those playlists called? How do they refer to that? Is this meditation music? Is most of what you create actually called meditation music? Is it jazz or is it contemporary jazz? Is it jazz or is it free jazz or whatever? So to me, it's like, even if you're an independent artist, you should know what your micro genre is. Because if you're an independent artist and you're going to We Are the Music Makers on Reddit and posting, you're probably going to get kicked off. If you go to the pop channel and you're posting about yourself, you're probably going to get kicked off or you're going to be buried. But it might be a little bit better if you go to, lo-fi electronic pop from Chicago. If there's a subreddit for that, then you might do a little bit better.
Obviously, having a record label in 2024 seems like a kiss of death financially. Like, it could seem like something where a lot of people, I mean, artists aren't making money a lot of times. And it seems like the idea then would be that labels are not making money. So my question to you is, how do small record labels, especially these niche ones that we're talking about, how do they make money? What are the best revenue streams for them?
Well, the biggest thing is multiple revenue streams. I think there are very few labels. There are some, but there are very few labels that have one revenue stream. There are some labels, I would say the majority of labels have a preferred revenue stream or a primary revenue stream. And so some labels, they do really well with vinyl. They do really well with physical product. They have a distributor. They have great relationships with their local record store. They have maybe a fan base who is committed to anywhere between 20 to 50 records on pre-order. So if you're pressing 300 records and you're getting them for $8, $7 each, and you're selling them for $25, and your fan base is committed to 40 or 50 of them, the artist can sell 40 or 50 of them on tour or to their fan base, and you have a distributor who's committed to 100 of them, and then you have some local record stores that champion you. So there are labels out there who have a really good model for vinyl and cassettes in the same way, less so with distribution in record stores, but who have like an online community for their cassettes. In those cases, streaming might just contribute a small piece to the pie. Sync licensing might contribute a small piece of the pie. And then there's labels in our community who are absolutely killing it on sync licensing. They come from a sync background, and they have relationships with sync agents and music supervisors. They have channels, direct channels. They record their music in the studio with a TV show in mind or with a type of sync in mind. And this is a record label. And then when that song does well on streaming, when that song does well on a sync, they also pick up some of the streaming revenue because people will watch it on TV, they'll Shazam it, and they'll go find it, or it gets placed on a playlist for that TV show. And so they get some streaming money, but the majority comes from sync. So there are a lot of labels where they just find their path, and maybe that's physical, maybe it's sync. We have a lot of relaxation, meditation, neoclassical labels in our community that are just killing it on Spotify and are on incredible playlists, and they make tons of money monthly from Spotify. And in the same community, there's people who get absolutely $0 and now officially are getting $0 from Spotify. And so it's there, but I will say those are unique examples. A great label should be working on all of those channels, plus revenue streams I haven't mentioned, plus a revenue stream that I or you have never thought of before. That to me is a really exciting record label.
So we talked about streaming, we talked about physical media, and we talked about sync licensing. Are there any others as well? So like maybe publishing, or what are these other ones? You said there was a couple other ones. Let's dive into those.
Okay. Publishing, I don't really think that my personal belief is I don't think record labels should get involved with publishing. I think that should be left with a publisher or publishing admin. It's a very complicated process. It requires a know-how. It requires connections with other countries. And I just think to be done well, it requires special contracts with your artists. So to run a record label and a publishing company at the same time, I would question that if you're an individual person. So publishing, I don't think record labels get too much involved with, but some people do. I would say, let's see, what else do we have? There's the merch side of things. There are record labels that have started to see when a record label has music fans coming to their social media for their releases and coming to their website to buy their releases. Some record labels will start to carry other people's titles and start to move in the direction of like an online record store. Some record labels, when you start to have customers of a certain kind, then maybe you're also selling hardware. There's a record label in Calgary that has developed a plugin. So they're selling a music plugin, plus they sell records. And I mean, it's like there are no rules. It's like if you were to start a record label, would you think about also starting a music plugin, like creating a music plugin? And of course not. Like or a piece of hardware for studio or microphone. No, but that's incredible that like somebody would go out there and do that and understand that there are no rules, that you could open a record store. We have record labels in our community in New York who have a record store. So it started as a record label and then they opened up a traditional brick and mortar record store. Label services too. Some labels will offer some of the services that you're offering to independent artists that aren't officially signed to their label. There is a record label that just opened up a pressing plant in Pittsburgh. There's another record label in Oklahoma that started a distribution company, so they're taking care of digital distribution. These are creative record labels that are saying, we're not making enough from streaming. We're not making enough from physical sales. We're not making enough from sync, or maybe we just don't have the contacts to do those things. And so what's another way that we can be creative? Or maybe we're doing okay with streaming. We're doing okay with vinyl. We're doing okay with sync. We're doing okay with live shows. We're doing okay with merch. Maybe there's something else that we could do that nobody else is doing, like opening a pressing plant or opening a record store.
Yeah, those are all really unique examples. I didn't know record labels were doing things like that.
So do you hate them less now?
Maybe you might be changing my opinion a little bit. As an artist, right? You are a musician and you are a label owner. Now, I know your label now is mostly geared towards your own music, other songs. But as an artist, what can an artist do to look more attractive to a record label, especially like a good one that's like, that's maybe not taking the normal path. Maybe they have a pressing plant or they have, software, plugins or whatever. What can an artist do to find these good quality labels?
Well, I would say that when a record label is looking for an artist, or an artist is looking for a record label, and they meet, to me, I would be really turned off with someone who has no idea where they are in their career currently and where they want to go and what they want to do. To me, this is going to work if the artist is working just as hard on their career as the record label is working on their career. Like when it's a double partnership. And so I think when an artist knows, we're making an album, I'd like this album to come out in a year and a half from now. If they have a realistic idea of timelines and how the industry works, to me, that becomes more attractive to a record label, as opposed to, I don't think there are very many record labels. See, this is where it differs from the majors. I don't think there are very many record labels that would want to work with a child who has no idea what they're doing, someone completely ignorant and naive. That sounds exhausting. What sounds fun is collaborating with someone who's as serious about their music and their career as I am about my label, as I am about my music and my career. So I would say, when you're submitting to a record label, tell the record label what you want, very specifically, what you need for your career. Don't say exposure. That's stupid. Don't say, I need money. I need to get rich. You have to be very specific. And I sure hope that you're pitching to a record label that you've seen do for other artists what you expect or what you hope to do, and that there are labels, you're pitching to relevant record labels. So yeah, I mean, I don't really think too much on that side of things. But I did a video a long time ago about things that record label hate. And I don't remember now because it was about 2 years ago that I made it. But it's really nice when I get a pitch, and I don't get them anymore because, like you said, my label's focused on the label's kind of like cryogenically frozen right now. But my own music is the only thing that it's releasing. So I don't get submissions anymore. But you would get these submissions that would come in weekly, sometimes daily. Most of them would be like, yo, check out this. And it's a link to YouTube. And it's just like, that speaks volumes as to like what you expect me, your professionalism, like forget it. And as opposed to sometimes somebody will send me this long email saying, I've worked on this record, I've paid for it. We're not releasing it yet. I worked with this producer. I listen to some of your music and I think it's in line with blah, blah, blah. Just very coherent, very professional. Here's a link to the album. And here's what I'm looking for out of a label. I need a label to help me with vinyl manufacturing and vinyl distribution. And I'd love to chat with you, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, okay, that's great. That's a great starting point. Now you might click on the link, the music sucks, end of conversation. Or you click on the link and it's like, the music's really great. And this person seems really professional and put together. This is exciting.
So on the flip side of this, a lot of labels are known for screwing artists over. What can an artist do to make sure that their label doesn't do that?
Well, I don't know many labels today that screw people over. I don't really associate with many of them. I don't have many case studies. I know historically that's been the case, but what I kind of tell labels is, and I will say there have been some labels that screw people over, but generally it's not intentional, and people didn't start out that way to screw someone over. It was just someone very disorganized. But anyway, I would say that for an artist is you have to know what you want and you have to outline your expectations. This is the number one thing I tell labels when they meet with an artist. When you meet with someone, you're meeting with them because you love their music. So you heard their music and you love their music. And so when you meet with them, to me, it's like, as a record label, I would ask the artist, what are your expectations? And if an artist said to me, all I really want is to hear my music on a Netflix show, then I would say, okay, I know where to pitch for that, but it's very unlikely. And I don't have any contacts. I don't have any music supervisor contacts. My expertise is in a different space. I do have some streaming contacts. I'm a little bit better in the playlist world. I have some vinyl contacts. I know how to make great records. And they're like, no, it's all about sync for me. So to me, that you should not enter a relationship with that artist, a business relationship, if you've heard their expectations and you can't fulfill them. And so I would, if I was an artist, I would do the exact same thing at the coffee shop. I would say, what do you expect from me as an artist? Like, what do you get out of this deal? What do you want from this deal? And find out what their expectations are and just make sure everyone's on the same page. And then what you can do on your second date is when you have a deal memo and you actually write down these expectations into an agreement form on a napkin if you want. This is not a legal document. It's just saying, I want an advance of $1,000 because it will help me finish my record. I want my record to be on vinyl, and I want my label to work on this record, promoting this record for 6 months so that we can sell as many copies as possible. And I only want to work with this record label for 1 year from the release date. I won't work with any other record label for this entire year. I won't release anything else for an entire year. And I want 50% of the net profits. So you get these deal points, and if they agree to it, if everyone's expectations are in alignment, then you can sign a contract and go from there. But to me, and I'd say this more to labels because that's who I work with, it's like, go to this coffee shop, have multiple chats, unofficial chats. You can record them on your phone if you want, so people remember what the expectations were. But like, make notes about like, what does everybody think they're going to get from this relationship? And if there is something that you feel like you can't meet those expectations on either side, then you shouldn't get together. You shouldn't work together.
I think that is a really good point. And I think that you need to be in alignment. And anybody you hire on your team, whether that's management, whether that's tour managers, they need to be in alignment with your goals and beliefs and what you want to do. And I see a lot of artists who don't have any desire to be in the business side of things. And when I see those kind of artists, they're almost guaranteed to not have any modicum of success. And so I couldn't agree more. If you are not able to take care of the business end of your music career, you're going to fail every time. And it's why the artists who are at the top of the game, they have these managers, they have their business contacts, they have all the people there who help them to make the right decisions, to give them the best information. And so if you're not aligned with your team, you are almost destined to fail, in my opinion.
Other Record Labels is proudly supported by Infinite Catalog. Every record label, big or small, needs to keep track of their royalties, and Infinite Catalog is the preferred tool for labels in our community. An online platform that takes in all of your label's revenue data and neatly organizes it for you and the artists on your label. And most importantly, they help your artists get paid on time and accurately. So thanks to Infinite Catalog for supporting our community. Go to infinitecatalog.com and specifically infinitecatalog.com/other record labels for a special discount to get started.
So now, how does one market a record label? Because we've talked about finding artists, we've talked about starting. Obviously, a label at its core is a brand, and obviously the focal point is going to be the artists. That's going to be the focal point of getting the stuff out, because you need to sell the artist in order to sell the physical media, whatever it is. But as far as marketing a record label, how important is that? And what are steps that record labels can take to ensure that their brand is also reaching out and connecting with a new audience?
Well, I think it's really important, and I think about this a lot. Unfortunately, it does have to take oftentimes it takes a backseat to the artists, as it should, and to the artist releases. But the way I think you market, I mean, we've already talked about the niche. I think that is the number one thing, is having a niche. And yeah, having that ahead of time before you start your record label is ideal, but it's not a deal breaker. I mean, I do think there is a possibility that you get started as a record label and a niche emerges, that you do the things that you love. You work with the artists, only the artists that you really, truly enjoy and love their music. And then maybe you start to see some common denominators, and a niche or a micro niche or a subgenre appears. That's what happened to me. I realized I was doing my own music. I had some free time, so I was recording my friend's band. And then they brought in one of their friends to record. And I said, we should start a record label. There's 3 of us here. We could share resources and everything. And then I realized, hey, you know what? There's like a kind of a Canadiana folk sound that's emerging from this. That's kind of cool. And so we didn't really start with a niche. It just formed. And I think what happens is, if you stay consistent, a lot of labels don't like doing this. A lot of labels don't like sticking to one genre. They want to open themselves up to other opportunities, or maybe as a music fan, they like lots of genres. But I think if you stay consistent, that's a form of marketing. If you are consistent in this type of music that you do, the type of artists that you, even their personalities or their aesthetic, that you release on your roster, all of a sudden this brand starts to form. It's kind of hard to do on day one, because all you have is your first release and your logo. So it's kind of hard to say, we are a brand like XYZ or like such and such. You can't really establish that immediately. But by being consistent over time, then that becomes a form of marketing, because what happens is, you release these quality releases and there's some sort of common thread, whether it's like a very obvious subgenre, or maybe it's a type of recording, all analog instruments and analog mixing and analog mastering, and you can feel it, you can hear it in the music. Whatever it is, that there's this common thread. Over time, your fans start to go, oh, this doesn't surprise me that this record is from such and such label, because it sounds like it should be from such and such label. And we all have labels like that, that we kind of go to, that's like, I bet you any money this is from such and such, and sure enough it is. And the same thing in graphic design. I'm passionate about design, as I mentioned, and so when a record label like Blue Note has a consistency in their graphic design, I love that. Or even a step further, where all the album covers look the same, minus a few changes, or an Obi strip on every record that is uniformed. I love that. I think that's really cool. As a music fan, I love that. As a record label, I love that too. But as a music fan, to have like collect all 5 of, from this label, I think that looks really cool. So I think when you're consistent, I mean, when it comes to going out and marketing the label, paying for ads, that kind of stuff, that's a little bit harder to do. That time and money is better spent on the individual releases. But just being consistent as a label with your releases is kind of enough, I think.
I love that. I think, the thing that popped in my head when you were talking about that is like early Sub Pop, because I'm originally from Seattle, and so early Sub Pop before Nirvana, and now Sub Pop is all sorts of stuff. They've got hip hop and alternative hip hop, but in the late '80s, Sub Pop would put out compilations, and these compilations, they just had these loud guitar bands that weren't really punk and weren't really metal, but were kind of like in between the two. And you just knew that these artists from all over America, that you just knew it was like a Sub Pop sound. And then obviously that sound, catapulted in the stratosphere with Nirvana. But yeah, I think they didn't, they weren't trying to put out a grunge record and then put out, a Public Enemy record or something. They stuck consistent. And I think that's 100% like, that tracks not only now but through the history of the recording industry.
Well, and Sub Pop's now got to a place where the logo is synonymous, and so you can say you can do hip hop, you can do folk, you can do all sorts of things because they've kind of transcended that, which is a great place to be. And it's similar to Columbia Records, they've gotten to a place where they can do whatever they want.
And that's also an example too, where they do have like a really solid brand, and they have a team, they have a warehouse. I've been to their warehouse in Seattle. It's a business, and they do have a bit more artistic cred than some major labels, but it is like they push their artists to do press and content and stuff, just almost like a major label. It's just on a slightly lower level of the game. And I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. And they have like a airport store, right? They have and I mean, also they really embrace the city, which is another thing that could be part of your niche. When record labels say, hey, you know what? We're from this country that is underappreciated, or we're from this city and we want to help define this city or let this city define us. That's part of your niche.
Yeah, 100%. I had friends who were signed to Sub Pop, and it was very much like, oh, Seattle is the hub of it. And then even when they weren't, and they started signing other ones, they made a subsidiary called Harley Art. I think it's Harley Art, which was like all Seattle bands. It was really cool. We had people I played shows with, were signed to them and stuff. And theirs were.
Yeah. When we started the podcast, both of those labels were in our first year. We had Harley Art in our first couple of episodes, and we had Sub Pop.
That's awesome.
About a year later.
Yeah. I mean, the Sub Pop guys they're really cool. I love them. Bruce Pavitt, and I can't remember the other guy's name, Jonathan something. I can't remember their name.
We had Carly Starr, who is the marketing director.
Okay.
She was our guest on the show.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So obviously vinyl and cassettes have had a bit of a resurgence in the last decade, which is awesome. I'm a vinyl snob, just like everybody else is. I see you've got, looks like a Phil Collins vinyl behind you.
Yeah.
Is somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
How can a label hop into that market without spending a ton of money up front? Because vinyl can be very pricey as an upfront cost, because you are paying for the manufacturer, and you might not have even sold a single one, or sold any of them, and it can be thousands of dollars very quickly if you're not careful. Are there ways for or maybe not even ways, but like a method for a label to dip their toes into that without feeling overwhelmed with trying to ship 200 of them?
Well, yes and no. I guess you could say that you could start with cassettes first, because you can do a run of 10 cassettes for at that price. It's maybe almost $8-9 each. So you could do, if you want to dip your toes in physical media. But I don't think cassettes are a good indicator whether your fans are interested in vinyl. So to me, it's like, I love both. I collect both, but I don't think I'm the normal type of music collector out there. So on one hand, I know a lot of labels who start with CDs, move on to cassettes or vice versa, and then eventually, okay, we're selling enough of these, I think we could try out vinyl. And then either they didn't like it, or they then stop doing CDs and cassettes and they move on to all vinyl. I guess on the other side of the coin, you could also do lathe cuts, where you could do a short run of 10 records. They're going to cost you $20 or $30 each, and you have to sell them then hand numbered for $40 to make your money back, or give them just to the bands and their band's parents or something. And you could dip your toes that way a little bit. I also know one of our partners, Precision Pressing in Canada, a great pressing plant here that I've worked with, they're getting into much shorter runs. They're doing drop shipping, I believe, is something that they're looking at doing too, where they're, instead of shipping 100 records to the band and then the band selling it and then having to ship it again to the artist, that they can just wait and to ship it directly from the plant to the music fan. And so I know that they're doing like a cheaper model that's a little bit more of an introductory. So there are like ways to kind of dip your toes, but I would say the best way to dip your toes is to pick a release you're really excited about. Maybe it's a compilation, although vinyl compilations are a little tricky, but maybe. But just, I would say, pick an artist you really believe in who's made a great record and press that. Make 200 copies, make 300 copies. It's going to cost you about $2,000. But that's a way to dip your toes. Do it, and you're going to learn a lot. That's a university degree on pressing vinyl, is if you press vinyl. And you're going to realize, okay, we've got 80% of these in my garage. We should have sold them for cheaper. We should have went for color instead of all black. Maybe we shouldn't have done these inserts. That was stupid. Maybe we didn't need download cards. People don't use those anymore. You learn all these things. So yeah, there's like a couple ways you could dip your toes, but I would say just go for it. Give it a try. And I did it with my own record, my own label in 2013. And I learned a lot. And it sucked. And I didn't sell nearly as many as I thought. I made so many mistakes, but I've pressed vinyl, dozens of times since then. And I love it.
What were some of your early mistakes in pressing vinyl?
I underestimated how long it would take. I thought you could send them the files and you would get the records in a couple of weeks. And this was in 2013, back when that wasn't crazy. It still took August, September, October. It still took 3 months, which in COVID, after COVID, vinyl manufacturing was taking over 12 months. It's now down to it's really good because there's a lot more plants and there's a lot more capacity. So I think you could be anywhere between 3 to 6 months, maybe 4 months. So I underestimated how long it would take. And so I didn't have my records on release day. And I had a big release show. And I wanted to sell vinyl. And so what I had a test pressing, and I was like, this is sort of what it will look like. Do you want to give me $25 now? And then I'll mail you a record, or I'll drop it off at your house. It sucked. And then I went on a little tour and the records still weren't in hand. So, it was a disaster. And I wish I had known the lead time. So the first thing you do when you talk to a pressing plant is like, what's the lead time? And the lead time will be a certain amount of time from when you get them, the deposit, the audio files, and the artwork. And 80% of the mistakes that happen in a pressing project happen on the artwork. So assuming your artwork has been approved, your audio files are submitted, and even those have been approved, and you've submitted your deposit, which is usually 50%, that's when the clock starts ticking. And so that's, if your pressing plant says 4 months, approximately, then it starts when you've got all of that stuff to them. So you really want to make sure, if you're like me and you have a tour and a release date coming up, you work back from there. So say 4 months, give yourself 6 months, at least 6 months, maybe 6 to 8 from when your release day is going to be, from when you start manufacturing. So that was a big issue. I did a kind of an unexciting package. Vinyl was a novel thing still for people in 2013. So just the idea that an artist had artwork with a black vinyl, black and white label, that doesn't sell as well today than color does. I mean, color is, unfortunately, it's kind of mandatory.
Really?
I hear that from a lot of labels, and I kind of agree. And I even as a music fan, I see a black option, and I'm like, okay, it's about the experience, right? It's about getting this cool package. It's not. I tell people vinyl is a nice to have. It's not a need to have. We don't need it to consume music. So it has to be a really fun experience.
So are there any other like hacks? I don't want to say hacks, but like things that people should look out. So obviously you said lead time's another one. You said color is almost mandatory now. That was your exact words. You said I know, I love it. I'm here for it. I have one of my favorite vinyl purchases I ever made was what's the famous New Order album? Truth, Lies, and Corruption. I can't remember, but it's in this like crystal blue, off-white blue. It looks so cool on a turntable. It looks awesome. So I 100% agree about that.
I bought an artist record on vinyl off of Amazon. Don't cut that part out. But I got the black version, and I didn't know that it came in a different color. And then I went to their Instagram, and like the indie record store version or the version you buy from them came in like a cool, like, a canary color. And I was like, oh, that sucks. Like, I didn't know that. I was just trying to save some money and get it overnight. But I think some other. So sorry, what's your question? Like other like lessons or other ways to make cool?
Well, I guess let's go with make cool records. I think one of the other things you mentioned too was like download cards are no longer in vogue. Is there anything else like to help? The thing is, I want obviously like you had that experience with the lead time and going on tour without records and stuff. I think someone who listens to this podcast and is considering pressing vinyl, I would love for them to know like what are the things that they can do to ensure that they have a better chance of selling their product.
You can't just assume that people want, and you say you're a vinyl head, so like you can't, this to be true. You can't just assume that people want your music on vinyl as if that's the only way they can listen to your music. And so when you make a black record with just a boring label, and you take your digital album cover and you blow it up so that it's 12 by 12 inches, and that's it, like no inserts, nothing, and you hope to sell them, well, you're really only going to sell it to the people who are like diehard for your music and are also diehard vinyl collectors. But diehard vinyl collectors also don't want like ugly records in their collection. Like some people are quite curated about their collection. So I think the most important thing is if you're going to do vinyl, do it right. And I mean, you can go through these quote generators and you can make 200 copies for $1,800 or whatever. And at the bare minimum, or it's maybe $2,500 to add color, to add splatter, to add a cool insert, but to me, it's like that extra is worth it. So that what you want is you want someone to see the digital mock-up because it's being pressed and you're selling pre-orders. They go to your BandCamp or Instagram and they see the digital mock-up and they go, I have to have that. I need that. Like that looks so cool. And people say that about great records. You've said that. I've said that about bands. It's like, I need that. You don't want someone to be like, oh, cool, they're releasing it on vinyl. Because if someone thinks that when they see it on BandCamp, they're not going to buy it. Especially if they're from Japan and the checkout process, the shipping is $30, the record's $25. They're going to be like, forget it. It's not worth it. But if the record looks really cool, it has great artwork, it wasn't designed by you, it was designed by someone who's smart and makes great decisions. If the record color complements, not matches identically, but complements the album cover, the labels are cool. If there is some sort of insert, maybe it's a poster, maybe you use reverse board so it feels like soft and textured on the cover. or embossing or a die cut. You spend a bit of money and make it cool. Maybe there's something that you can do that's free where you do the inserts at home. Like you make 100 handwritten lyrics and put them in. You hand number them and sign it. People really think that's cool. You get test pressings with most times when you do a pressing, and you get 5 to 10, however many you want, but usually it's 5. And those test pressings, like, don't just throw those in the garbage. Give them to the band members or autograph one and sell it for like $50 to your diehard fans. I sold a test pressing for my latest record, or 2 records ago, I think. I sold it for $100, and I sold it on BandCamp, 1 copy for $100, and it was, I shipped it 6 months before the album came out. So nobody knew what the album sounded like. They didn't know the album cover, the album title, the track listing. One person in the world got the album 6 months before everyone else, and it sold out in less than a minute. I posted it, and it was gone. Because it's interesting, right? It's somebody who's like, I have to have that. And that test pressing was free. Like it just came with you sort of pay for it, but it's part of the pressing package. Most people throw them out. So it's like, there's a lot of creative things you can do with vinyl. Just understand that it's a nice to have, it's a luxury item. And so make it a luxury item.
This is awesome. I'm loving this. This is such good info that I think a lot of people are going to really resonate with. So I want to switch paths with you a little bit. And one of the things I was really fascinated to find out about you and about other record labels and other songs is the incredible following you have on BandCamp. I mean, you go through every one of your BandCamp releases and you have all these pictures of people who support you. You've got editorials, you've got all sorts of stuff. And BandCamp for a lot of musicians it's a second or third place to put your music, and usually people don't promote it. They don't promote it right, and it's also very hard for a lot of artists to build a connection there and find the fans that do shop at BandCamp, because there's a very specific person that shops for music on BandCamp. So how have you been able to build a following and connect with that audience that shops on BandCamp?
I appreciate that. I don't think I have a good following. I mean, I love them. I do have, I'm grateful, but I mean, I compare it to some of the labels that I know, and I'm jealous of their following. And, there's labels out there that will release an album at 11 p.m. the night before it comes out on digital, and they'll sell out all their physical copies before midnight. And so there are great labels out there. And BandCamp has always been a very special tool. They've always operated in a way that's completely different from other, if we call it social media in a way. It's, of course, it's a platform, it's a retail platform, but it has some social components to it, similar to YouTube or whatnot. But it's always operated differently. It's clean, it's simple, it's not like feature creeped with like a bunch of annoying stuff. It's kind of been a little bit for music snobs, but not. It's also accessible to everyone. Now, I will say they've changed hands. They are evolving. Luckily for us, from the way it looks, from the front end, I know it's different on the back end, but it's remained pretty much the same over the past 20 years or so. But it, by the time this comes out or in a year from now, things might have changed. But I think, honestly, we embraced BandCamp from day one. I think our first release went up there in 2009. And I believe the app started in 2008 or 2009. So I've had an account from day one. I've been friends with the people who work there. I just think we were just lucky. We were just like at the right place at the right time, and we've been consistent. And I think any artist and any record label needs to measure their success over a long time period. And so, we've had maybe a half dozen BandCamp features on editorial, some really big, some just pretty small, but that's over the course of 15 years. So Is that successful? I don't know. That's one every 2 years. That doesn't sound that great. You know what I mean? So it's really just over a long, long time period. I really like BandCamp, and I think there are a lot of music fans that really do. If there's something that goes wrong with it, for whatever reason, it'll be a devastating loss to the music community. And I hope that something quickly comes along to replace it, because when we talk about streaming on the podcast and in our community, talk about the difference between passive listeners and active listeners, passive music fans and active music fans. And I don't discredit or disparage the passive music fans. Those are people who listen to chill study playlists, coffee shop playlists, or road trip playlists, and they hear my music or your music and not know who the band is, but they still give us money. They still pay the rent. Those are our passive fans, and I don't disparage them, and without them, I wouldn't be here. But then BandCamp provides us these active fans. It's those faces you see on each release. And they're people who message us and buy a digital single in this day and age. Why? Why are you buying a digital album? Why are you buying one song for $1? That's absurd to me, but to them, they do it. It's meaningful, and I'm grateful that they do. So it's a great group of fans. I don't know. Do I have advice for you? I don't. Sorry.
Well, are there ways that artists could better utilize BandCamp that you see, or labels?
Yeah.
I mean, I
wrote an article on it. othersongs.com/BandCamp, little plug there. I've answered a lot of these questions before in episodes, because they're questions I hear a lot. And I mean, give yourself lead time. The BandCamp editorial team, I don't know where they're at today or who's running it, but they usually like to be submitted albums 4 months in advance, 3 to 4 months in advance. That's mind-blowing for independent artists. I mean, how many of us get a mix back, get it mastered using Lander, upload it to DistroKid, and then tell our friends later that day that we have a new album out? You know, that's not a great way to run a business. Sometimes it looks like our favorite artists are just dropping records out of nowhere, but there's a lot of people and effort and work that's gone into it. And so I know BandCamp editorial, they don't really care about singles. It's EPs and albums and compilations. And if you want to submit to them, you have to send it to them, pitch it to them like 3 to 4 months ahead. So lead time is very important. And also understand that when you're submitting an album, when you're creating an album on the platform, there's these little boxes that you can fill in. And artists like to be coy. They like to appear cool. And so they don't upload their lyrics. They don't upload the producer credits or the musician credits. They don't write a little story about the album. They don't upload an extra photo or a video. They just post the album and think that, oh, the music will speak for itself. But BandCamp actually really likes it when you fill in all of those forms that they provide you. If you're selling a record or a tape, don't just upload the digital album cover of the record that we can see on Spotify. Show me what that vinyl looks like. Show me with the music fan holding it up in their hand and showing the cool green record. You know what I mean? Like, show that. Or at the very least, use a Photoshop mock-up and show what that looks like. So like when you click on a release and it has a digital album, it has a cassette version and a deluxe vinyl and a regular vinyl, and it's like all of this stuff, and then there's a write-up about the album, and then there's bonus tracks that aren't available on Spotify that are on the album, and then there's like all the credits so I can see like some of my favorite musicians worked on this record. All of a sudden you're gonna have way more success than just like uploading the MP3s or WAV files or whatever, you know?
Who are some specific people who are killing the BandCamp game in your opinion?
Oh, I'm on the spot now. I mean, my favorite label, and this is, I'm just biased. Well, I'm not biased, but this is my favorite label, but I really like these kind of like cooler design labels. Like Geographic North is a cassette label that is killing it in my opinion. And I've had them on the show, and I'm just a really big fan of them. And there's a Canadian label called Seance Center as well, and they do really cool stuff on BandCamp. So many people in our community the labels, and I'll kick myself for not thinking of them later. But I mean, BandCamp does a really good job at showing you labels that are doing it well. You will know that a label that's doing it well when you go to their BandCamp page and it looks really cool. And one of the things I love about, we talked about marketing a record label. One of the things I really love about BandCamp and marketing a label is that, and you don't see this anywhere else, but when you go to the record label's BandCamp page, you see all of their releases, right? Like laid out face forward. Even if a record label owned their own record store, they wouldn't be able to do it this nicely. And so to me, a record label that's killing it is when I go to their BandCamp and I see all of these records and I want every single one of them. They're so beautiful. Or you click on the merch tab and it shows you all their vinyl or all their cassettes. And, that's, to me, love that.
I think we're seeing a theme here in the fact that we've talked about in both vinyl and BandCamp, that if you want to appeal to people, you've got to make aesthetically pleasing products. I mean, it just seems to be like, and that even comes from like how you set up your BandCamp page. It has to be aesthetically pleasing. It has to be something that makes people go, "Oh, that's really cool. I want to own that," just to have it look at it and see how aesthetically pleasing it is. I think that's a really good way of thinking about this for sure.
And you don't need to be obsessed with design like I am. And this is not a subjective opinion. This is true across the board for anything that we buy. We have to kind of tap into the irrational mind of people. And artists out there forget that people don't need their music. We don't need their music. Like, we have other musicians we can listen to. So you really need to make sure that you're providing value, or you're convincing. Sorry, let me rephrase that, because of course we need musicians. My favorite bands, I need them. If my favorite bands didn't exist, I would die. So I do need those artists, but I've been convinced that I need those artists. And I'm convinced daily that I need those, or weekly or monthly, or whenever they come out with a new record, that I need that record. I need that album. And so I think fans or music artists take it for granted, and even record labels, that all you have to do is release something and they will come. If you build it, they'll come. It's not true. You got to convince them. You got to give them value. Give value in their life. I don't mean value in like the buy one, get one free value. I mean, it's like that feeling. When you get a record in the mail, it's like you're seeing the postman walk down the street with your cardboard box, and you're there waiting, and then you have a knife ready, and then you open it and you sniff it and you put it on the table. Like, to me, it's like we need to tap into that more. Don't take that for granted. I know it's hard. Like, not everybody's going to be waiting for our records in that same way, but just don't take that for granted.
I love that, man. You're making me want to go to the record store right now after this.
Me too. I know. I miss my records right now. I want to go downstairs and talk.
That's right. I think that's 100% true. And so one of the things I consult with a lot of artists, and we haven't had too many artists who've pressed vinyl, or they've cassettes or CDs or anything like that. But we have a lot of artists who do really well on Spotify, and what we tell them a lot of times is that if you're not because the Spotify, the visual framework that Spotify has, like, it doesn't really value album art as much. It doesn't value singles. I mean, it's a tiny little speck square, and honestly, we tell artists to save that money on the single cover or the album cover and put it into like a visualizer, for example. And so I think what's really cool is if you do go this route and you do go into pressing physical media, like cassettes or vinyl, it is important and imperative that you create something that looks cool, that represents the music, and honestly, that's kind of like why vinyl is so fun, is because you get to have that experience, like you said, of looking at the art, smelling the vinyl, putting it on a turntable, watching the needle hit it for the first time, watching the music come out, and you feel the music come out of the speakers, especially if you have a good setup. And I think that's why vinyl has had such a resurgence, is because it is that experience, and it is that level of detail. It is that piece of art that you are buying along with the music. You're getting two forms of art there.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And another little trick, I've done this on my last two records, and I hope to do it again, is you can create somewhat unique art for your vinyl that's different from your digital. So you're right. I mean, digital on Spotify is not that important, although I still do, when I'm testing out artwork, I do add it to iTunes and see what it looks like on the phone. I think that is important a little bit. But you're right, it's not as important, especially if you're doing a single and you're getting placed on a playlist. Nobody will ever see that artwork. And so I do agree with that. But one of the things I've been experimenting with is like different art for the vinyl, different art for the digital cover, and even different art for the CD and the cassette as well. On my two records ago, I did that. And it was really fun. I mean, when you put them all together, you could see that they're very, very similar. They're just laid out differently, like each one is bespoke. And I just think that people who recognize that would appreciate it. I don't think the average fan would notice it, but I think some people would appreciate it.
Oh no, I 100% agree. Tyler, the Creator, I believe was either 2023 or 2022, was the number one most purchased vinyl hip hop artist. And so one of the things he did that was really unique was he put out an album in 2022, I believe, and there were 8 different album covers for the vinyl. And so what happened was his fans, who are rabid and cult-like, they bought one of each in their collection. Oh, I've got this one, I've got this one, and you see them taking pictures with all their vinyl collection of this new album, and if you have fans that love that stuff and you can tap into them, I mean, it's not only a lot of money, but it's a lot of product being moved. I mean, it's phenomenal, and your stuff's getting out there, and you're creating deep connections with those fans through vinyl.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't even need to be Taylor Swift or Tyler, the Creator, to do that. I mean, that definitely helps. And I'm not sure I would suggest to most labels to go and do alternate covers, because that would be very, very costly. But there is, I mean, I know what you're saying, and I think you can tap into that collector mindset. I've bought tapes and records from artists that are, absurd, and it's like over the top and opulent, and I've paid a lot of money, that are absolute no names that nobody really would know who they are. But I do it because they somehow tapped into that collect all four mindset. And I like the way the spines look all together. So you can tap into that without actually having to feel like, oh no, I need to do what, Taylor did on Folklore Midnights or something. Like that's unattainable.
All right. So final question of this part of the interview section. What would you say is the biggest thing holding back small record labels today?
Well, I think any business needs to give itself time to build an audience, to iterate, to learn what their customers want, to learn what they want to offer. Some people don't want to get involved with sync licensing, or don't want to get into vinyl like we're talking about. They're not passionate about vinyl like you and I are, but they feel like they have to. And so it takes them a couple of years to realize, you know what? I know this great label that were all tapes. And then they decided to try vinyl, and it was a disaster for them. And then they went back to tapes, and they'll never do vinyl again. And so it takes time to do that. And I think the biggest challenge is that record label owners are not able to stick with it long enough to find their groove. And I mean, I was running my label, I had been 7 years, and I was at my breaking point. It was just completely alienated from a bigger community. And I just felt like why was there younger labels being more successful than me? And that's where I got the idea to start the Other Record Labels podcast, is to call these labels that I admired of all sizes and to ask them for advice. And that moment at the 7th year, that changed my life. And now it pivoted me in a completely different direction while still being able to do other things and working full-time in music. And that was 6 years ago, I think, or more. Yeah, that was 6 years ago. So it's like for me, it's been a 13-year process, 14-year process of just kind of iterating and doing more things and doing less things. And so I think it's challenging for record labels to make zero in streaming and to rack up credit card debt. I say to take a risk on vinyl. Well, that's hard to do when you have to put it on a credit card. And so, it's challenging to stick with it long enough to see it through, because every business needs time. It really does. And so if you can figure out a way to work your full-time job, by the way, any independent artist, any record label, it's okay to work a full-time job that's not in the music industry. That's very normal. Lots of actors are doing it and actresses are doing it. Lots of musicians, even some of your favorite musicians, even award-winning musicians, also work at a coffee shop or work as web developers. So work to support your music and maybe cut down to 80%, to 70%. And 13 years later, you can cut down to 0% and work 100% of the time. But it just takes time. And I think it's a real challenge that people aren't able to stick with it.
And then the last question is, what does the public get wrong about running a record label?
Well, I would just rewind and listen to the first half hour of our conversation. But, we are not, I don't care what the public thinks about record labels because, well, that's not true. I just think that indie record labels, as I mentioned, are not, they're not a different way to do a major label. They're not the same as major labels at all. It's a completely different beast. It's a collective. It's a community. It's an individual, passionate music fan that is curating something like a radio show or like I think that the idea, and I feel like maybe you came to this call with this mindset of like that all labels are the same. There's just some good and some bad. To me, it's different than that. There's these labels, and then there's this different thing that is forming here that has nothing to do with that, aside from the fact that we release music.
Well, Scott, I got to say, man, you've given me a lot of things to think about with record labels. I definitely had a different vision of what they were coming into this, and I'm going to do a lot more research, and I'm excited, man. I think the way you talk about record labels makes me excited. I think the future's bright for artists, and I think that's great. So, Scott, before we get off,
I think you're going to start a record label before the end of the year.
You know what? You wouldn't be the first guest to make a prophecy and then it come true. So
thanks again to
So
Banner
I wouldn't be surprised.
From Rhinestone Productions for sharing this episode with our community and for having me on his show. Go to the links in the description of this episode to check them out. This episode was brought to you by our friends at Infinite Catalog, the best choice for managing your record label's royalties. Use Infinite Catalog to get royalties done, keep everyone in the loop, and get everyone paid. Thanks for listening.